So anyway, I know we've had a lot of AI talks here recently. I think most of you have probably tried using AI at some level in your development workflow. How many of you before tonight have heard of spec-driven development? Okay, so it's funny, it's not a new concept, but I'd never actually heard the term until things like Claude Code started hitting the market. It basically just boils down to plan out and document what you're building before you build it. It's kind of my favorite way of building open source packages. When I build something open source, I like to build out the whole README before I write a single line of code and just really feel like I like this API. Like if I were shopping for a package to do a thing, this is how I would want it to work. And once I'm happy with the README, then I just write software to make it true. And spec-driven development is basically that. You create documentation, and then you create the software to make that documentation true. Versus writing the software and then going back, trying to remember how you wrote it, and writing documentation based on that, which I think is kind of everybody's default way of doing things. But when you're working with AI and having AI generate some of your code for you, it's really helpful to make the decisions about architecture, tech stack, variable naming conventions, things like that up front. Because if you leave those decisions to the AI, it's going to make decisions you don't like, and it's going to make different decisions every 10 minutes. So you'll end up with kind of a mix and match architecture, no real standards across the board, because it doesn't think like a person. It encounters a problem, it solves that problem, whatever the statistically most likely way is to solve that problem. And that's not necessarily going to be in line with how you want to do things. What spec-driven development aims to solve, and I think it aimed to solve this before AI, but what it solves really well now with AI, is it gives you an opportunity to look closely at how you're going to build a piece of software before you actually start building it. There are a lot of tools out there. Obviously all of these AI agents now have like a plan mode, where that plan mode will guide you through kind of creating a plan for what you're going to build. There's Kiro, I think is the name of it, an IDE that I think Amazon put out that is specifically spec-driven development. So you start off by creating specifications with this IDE before you actually build anything. People are trying to solve it all kinds of different ways. The one that I've settled on and use is a product called Agent OS. It comes out of the Rails community. There's a Rails developer named Brian Castle, he kind of done some SaaSes in the past and is pretty well known in the Rails community. Has gotten really deep into AI, code generation, and has done a lot of experimentation around the spec-driven development. And he created a free open source package called Agent OS that I started using right away, and initially struggled a lot with it. But I stuck with it, and the reason I stuck with it is because it's very portable. It's just Markdown files, and it's not married to any particular IDE. It's not super opinionated about what model you're going to use. There are some nice optimizations if you're using Claude Code, because it does a good job supporting the sub-agents. So your primary agent will fire off other agents to do some of the work, so it will delegate kind of on the fly, and that's something that only Claude supports right now. But it works just as well with Junie or whatever you happen to be using. So that's at buildermethods.com, which is, this is Brian's new site. His business model here is he's created a community where you can pay for an annual membership and join a community and get support from him and learn from their community members about how they're using Agent OS and how they're using AI in general. And so this is sort of just a resource and a loss leader for him. So we'll click over on to Agent OS and just kind of look at the docs real quick, maybe. He appears to have vibe coded this site, or maybe I'm not on the right Wi-Fi. I'm not on Wi-Fi at all. How am I even connected? All right, we'll do it live. Okay, well, we're just going to trust that it exists and it's a thing. I don't actually know how to get onto this Wi-Fi, and I don't see my phone. Oh, here's my phone. Okay, good. So anyway, while we're waiting for that load, hopefully I can show you this. This is a fork of AgentOS that I created. AgentOS is, like I said, just a bunch of Markdown files. If we go into, and we'll see if I have enough connection to do this now, yeah. Go in here, there are profiles. So AgentOS by default will ship with this default profile. It has agents defined. So you have your implementation verifier, implementer, product planner. These are just basically instructions that are specific to the point in the process that you're in. So if you're starting to plan out a spec, then that agent's the one that's fired, and its instructions will be different from the one that's actually going to run the tasks. So nothing super interesting there. And there's commands, and these are just the basic commands that you use in this workflow. So you'll start with plan product, and plan product is kind of the first thing you would do when you install AgentOS into a new application. What it does is it goes through and it analyzes your existing code. So if this is an existing project, it will glean what it can from the code. Usually does a pretty good job of it. It kind of understands, even on some really old, chaotic, poorly documented applications, it's kind of understood the basic gist of what the application is supposed to do. And then it just asks you some questions to get the additional context it needs to understand what your business model is. And it creates documentation around your an overall product description, your mission, who your users are, so that it kind of understands the domain language. So when you're talking to it and saying, I need to add a new form so that trainers can do this, it knows who trainers are because it has that context now. So it can understand that sort of request. And then it has write spec and shape spec, and these are the ones where when you're creating a new feature, you're going to create a spec for it, and that spec is going to contain all of the information that the agent's going to need in order to build the feature the way you want it. It'll have any database schema changes listed and described in there. It will have a comprehensive list of all of the tests that it's going to write so that you can see, is it actually, that's kind of the most important thing for me. I read that because that tells me if it really does understand what I'm trying to do. Is it testing all the things that I would test? And then, basically in a general description of the feature that you're asking to write. And then if there are sort of complex pieces of that feature that go beyond just what it can fit in one single markdown, or anything that needs a bit of a deeper dive, it'll create sub-specs for that particular piece of the feature, where it will go into more detail on that piece of the feature. And then your job is to go through and read that spec and really refine it. And I never edit them directly because, and I'll show you an actual spec in a few minutes, you'll see that there's often repetition of things between these documents. And so if I make an edit that I actually want this to be called this in one place, that thing might be referred to 4 or 5 other times throughout the various pieces of the spec. So I always just tell Claude, no, I actually want this thing to be called this instead. And it'll go through and update the spec to make those changes. Then when I'm happy with it, it has a create tasks command that it will kind of run itself. I don't think I ever actually trigger this on my own, because when we get to the point in the specs where I feel comfortable with it, where I feel like it's ready to go, I just say, go ahead and run your task. Create the task list, and it knows to fire off this command, and it breaks out the task list. Depending on the complexity of the feature, it's anywhere between 6 and 20 tasks, and each one of those has subtasks. And from there, you have this orchestrate tasks, which is basically just if you're working with something that only supports a single agent, it just kind of does everything sequentially. If you're working with something that supports sub-agents, then of course that would be orchestrated, so you'd have some work going on concurrently. And this is kind of what it comes with by default. Then there are obviously, your standards. You can define all of your back-end stuff, your front-end stuff, global stuff, testing, workflows. If you have other sorry, not workflows, that part of it. But if there's other stuff, like I keep an architecture folder in here. So any standards that you put into here, it will then copy into your project and use those. And then, yeah, these are the workflows, which is basically instructions for, planning, implementation, and creating the specification. And every single one of these things is just a markdown file. There's nothing special or magical about it. So the entire package is literally nothing but markdown and some scripts some bash scripts that just take that markdown and put it where it needs to be. So with that, I'll just kind of show you, whoops, flip left. I need a sticky note.
Can you increase the font size?
Yeah. How do I do that?
Command plus. Or you go to presentation mode.
View, presentation mode. I need to get the presentation assistance. What the hell? Oh, there we go. Here we go. Okay. I don't have my terminal in this mode, so that's awkward. Sorry, I'll just use the terminal as is. So what was I going to show here? Oh, I was going to show spec. Now, here we go. So I'll show you here. This is what a spec ends up looking like. I created a Forge client package for the new Laravel Forge 2.0 API. I generated it using Saloon and the Saloon SDK generator plugin. So I didn't actually have Claude do a ton of work in here. What I had Claude do was basically create an artisan command for each one of the endpoints so that I could just visually test that things are working. So now I have like PHP artisan forge create server, PHP artisan forge destroy server, all of these so that I could, because I obviously had tests written and they all passed, but I wanted to be able to actually spin up a server and see it work and see what the output is and make sure everything's working. So I had to create that. And so this is kind of what the spec ended up looking like. I'll go ahead and close this. So it has the date, the created, the status is planning, which is not true. This is actually implemented. So this is one of the little quirks in the system. It never goes back itself and will update this to say that the spec has been completed. I am working on some things that will help me to share specs between stakeholders, because right now it just becomes markdown files inside of the code base, and that's fine for me to just throw up in a branch and tell the other developers, hey, I have a spec I'm working on for this. Would you guys take a look at this and make sure that I'm not missing anything? What it doesn't do well is it doesn't allow me to reach out to the non-developer stakeholders and say, hey, marketing team, I've written a spec for this. You can ignore all the deep, dark technical stuff, but would you read through the user stories and let me know, did I actually get this right? So the way this is right now, because there's markdown files in the repo, that's an awkward conversation for me to have. I have to talk them through how to do that, or I have to export the markdown and send it to them, or So I'm writing some tooling around that, so there will just be a URL that they'll be able to go to that will display all of these things and a little chat window where they can give feedback. And I'll update you on that when it's ready, because I think anybody who ends up using the system will kind of want that, because you'll all run into the same problem immediately when you have to start dealing with any stakeholders that aren't in GitHub or aren't comfortable with traversing code. It gives you an overview, and then it kind of writes some documentation for itself. Like I told it where the OpenAPI spec was that I had grabbed from Forge, yeah, it just writes some user stories, right? It's like what you would expect, and it's kind of probably what you're already doing. It's writing user stories, more user stories, and then it lists specifically anything that's out of scope. So this again is more really for the non-technical stakeholders, that they agree that yes, this is out of scope. We're not actually going to do these things during this run. Describes the expected deliverable, and then it just defines where all of these things, the task list, the technical specification, the API specification, and the tests, and all these, again, are just separate markdown files that we can review individually. So if we wanted to look at, say the tests here, these are descriptions of each one of the tests that it's going to write. And it does, at the end, all of these tests will have been created. So obviously you want to take a close look at this. I didn't honestly take that close a look at this because everything that this was doing was just a layer on top of something that was already tested. So this was really just, I want you to create a UI or a terminal interface for me to actually demonstrate that these things work. So I didn't read this as closely as I usually would have, but generally speaking, that is like the number one thing that I will read over. And there's a technical spec, which just kind of dives a little bit deeper into the technical details of what it's going to do, where it does discuss, how the SDK was generated, what's going to be generated, all of that good stuff.
Can you use Laravel Boost together with H&S? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I do. Though I will say I'm a little conflicted about what to do about Laravel Boost. I do enjoy it, but it is a real context hog. And I think a lot of what it does, because I'm a Claude user, could probably be better solved with Claude skills. So, I love the tooling. Like, I would never want to get rid of the Tinker tool and things like that. But a lot of the documentation, the standards, and things like that, I think would be better as I don't know if anybody used Claude skills yet. It's basically just another Markdown file, but that's where you you could give it like a Tailwind CSS skill. It would be a very big Markdown file, right? But it's basically everything that it would need to know to effectively write Tailwind US or Tailwind CSS. You can give it a Laravel Forge skill, which is something I'm going to bundle in with this this Forge package that I created. So like you could, now I would never do this, but I know people will want to do this, say, spin up a new server or create a new site, and it will be able to use this Forge skill to know which commands. So rather than having an MCP tell it what tools are available, you basically just create this skill that tells it, if you want to do this, run this command. And so it becomes just a Markdown file, and it's then only loaded into context when needed. If you write a good description, it only loads into context when you need it. So it's not going to be like with Laravel Boost, it seems like it loads too much. It just kind of throws all of its knowledge into context on every request, and yeah, if you're using it a lot, you'll see your that auto compact. If you're a Claude Code user, you know that X% left to auto compact. To see that happen very, very frequently if Boost is being invoked a lot. So to answer your question, yes, you can use Boost, and I will continue to use Boost. My hope is that they'll consider moving some of the things that would be better as skills to skills, and I don't know how configurable it is, whether I can disable those things myself or whether I'll have to fork Boost.
I think you can just use the MCP service, and that's it. You don't have to use the all the instructions. So
yeah,
I
haven't looked at it yet. It's one of those things like I've noticed this is a problem because there are some things that obviously Boost doesn't have, like verbs. That like I've done that as a skill. And so now I have this verb skill, and I'm like, well, this is so much nicer than having all of this context loaded in every time. So it only reaches for this if it's creating a verbs event or a verb state. It doesn't reach for it any other time. And so it's out of context until it's needed, which is a big win. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, absolutely, use Boost. I think that if you're doing any AI development with Laravel, at this point, you need to have Boost in your site because I can tell you how often, especially where it's really helpful is you get to the end of running a spec and you're going through and you're saying, hey, I'm seeing that there are, this thing says I have 6 of this, but I feel like I should have 12. And it can use Tinker and reach into the database and say, oh, well, the reason things there are only 6 is because you have this scope on here. Oh, great. Well, it would take me forever to figure that out. But because it can just go in and run Tinker, it can figure out those kind of little details at the end very quickly. So yeah, I love Boost and highly recommend that you use it in conjunction with this or whatever other AI tooling you're using.
one more from me.
Okay.
Did you compare to other like spec-driven frameworks, or do you think they're all similar? So
I
it doesn't
think
make
they're
sense.
all pretty similar. Again, I think the reason I chose this is because it's not bundled with anything else. A lot of the other ones are like Hero is like the full. You have to buy in the full IDE, right? You have to, and then you're paying them for their tokens at whatever markup they have, and this I can just kind of take it and put it anywhere because it's literally just markdown. And so that's kind of why I chose it. Because it's so extensible, and also because of the profile system. I think that for me is another big win. That I haven't really used it much other than just having created that standard Laravel one. But we're kicking off a native PHP project next week, and so I'm going to basically take that Laravel profile that I have and have a native PHP profile that will inherit from the Laravel profile, but then we'll have all the native PHP specific stuff in there. And the ability to just inherit a profile, because there's going to be 95% overlap, right? There's only a handful of things that are different between native PHP and Laravel. And it's really mostly additive, but that way I don't have to copy and paste the entire directory and maintain a whole bunch of other stuff. It's literally just like this profile inherits from here, and then you add whatever stuff you need to it. So I think ergonomically, I really like it. I can't speak to the quality of the output versus like a Kiro or anything like that. I did dabble a little bit with Kiro, and I've tried some other tools just that I've come across, and they all aim to do the same thing. And I think if they do a decent job at it, they're going to get good results, because it really comes down to just making sure that all decisions are made by the engineer and not by the AI. And as long as they're all kind of driving at that and doing a pretty good job of getting there, I think that the end result, because what matters, right, is the application that we get at the end, or the feature that we get at the end. I think that it's going to be kind of pretty much the same. So just kind of pick the tool that feels the best to you. And for me, what matters is the ergonomics, the flexibility, the ability to extend it quickly, and the ability for me to understand it. And the fact that it's all just markdown makes it really, really nice. I don't have to, I know a lot of things in AI are just markdown, but this is very easy for me to, kind of categorize and understand everything I'm looking at, and when I need to make a change, I know exactly where to go. Whereas with any of the others, there's, vendor lock-in is a little more opaque. And with that, if anybody wants to try these things, our fork is at github.com, artisan build agent OS. This is our Agent OS installer that sets up all of those code quality tools and then pulls in the Laravel profile by default. Once I have other profiles in there, I'll add to that install command for you to select which of the profiles you want. And then if you create your own profiles, obviously I'll have it make those an option as well. Buildermethods.com if you're interested in spec-driven development in general or Agent OS specifically. I would strongly recommend you go there, because Brian is a great teacher. He's been doing this for a very long time, and you'll learn a ton from him. And if you have any questions going forward about any of this stuff, feel free to reach out. This is my email address.
Thank you.